It's Monday, October 29th, 2012, and you're watching Our Pagan Opinions. So today's topic is a very interesting topic, and I'm very happy that I am making the video this week to talk about this topic because it is very interesting, it's controversial, and I love controversy. And it's a very good topic because I feel that I can cover the topic pretty well because it deals with a subject matter which I am knowledgeable in. So the topic is it possible to actually be Christo-Wiccan or Christo-Pagan? Why do you feel this way? So the question really is, can you be a Christian pagan or a pagan Christian? There's two ways that you can look at this question. Well, first of all, I want to answer yes. You can be a Christo-Wiccan or Christo-Pagan. I'm going to focus on Christo-Pagan instead of Christo-Wiccan because I don't know so much about the Wiccan aspects, but I know more about pagan traditions or pagan beliefs, and especially I'm very knowledgeable in Christianity. So I do think you can be a Christo-Pagan if you are a pagan and want to include Christ in your pantheon, or if you are a Christian and want to include pagans in your system, you can do that. So as I just mentioned, there's two ways you can go about this. You can be a pagan who wants to have Christ, Jesus, along in your practice, or you can be a Christian and incorporate deities. The second option is the hardest. It is very hard to be to call yourself Christian and still incorporate pagan deities into your theological perspective, because you have to break a lot of orthodox beliefs, a lot of traditions, a lot of doctrines, a lot of general just Christian beliefs. You will have to really toss aside and break a lot of rules if you want to consider yourself a Christian, but also incorporating outside deities. If you want to be pagan and incorporate Jesus, it is easier because paganism naturally is open. It's an open system. It can include any deity, because pagans and within paganism, it is not just my deity. Oh, it's only my deity. Where it only exists. Yours doesn't exist. In paganism, it's a system where every deity exists. Every deity is equal to its worship and its acknowledgement and having offerings to, or in belief. And if you look out through the ancient world, it was very there was no like conflict of oh, your God isn't real. Like pagan couldn't say to another pagan, your God isn't real, my God's real. Like they're all real. Every deity is real. And you can see, and with example with the Romans and the Greeks, the deities just merged. There was a total merging of the deities, where it's just like, oh, well, they're similar. Oh, they're let's merge them. And this was a gradual change. Over time, they said that they're similar, but they weren't actually merged in the beginning. It was merged later on, and I think Rome passed like a law or a decree or something saying that the deities are the same, that kind of thing. But anyway, my major point is that deities were always accepted into the traditions. In Rome, for example, they would bring in. There was a story where Rome was fighting someone, and they brought in Terra Mater, the Great Mother Goddess. I think it was Sybil from Asia Minor, and they brought her statue into Rome, seeking her favor to win the battle, and they won the battle. That's how the story goes. So pagans are always welcoming new deities into their pantheon, and Jesus is no exception. But the thing is, if you're going to be pagan and you're going to incorporate Jesus into your pantheon, you need to define how you're going to view Jesus and how you're going to use Jesus in your pantheon. There are three, when you study like Jesus and things about Jesus, you see there's three different Jesuses. There is the human Jesus, the historical Jesus of Nazareth. There is the church Jesus, which is Jesus Christ, and which is the divine version when he becomes divine. He's no longer man; he's both man and God, and he's equal. Jesus becomes equal to God. And then you have the universal Christ, which is called the cosmic Christ, or the universal Christ, the astral Christ. But the third aspect of Jesus is one which is universal to all things, to all people, and is open to everyone, and is not limited to just Christians or in the church. He is universal to everyone, and it's this something that they call the Christ consciousness. So you can incorporate Jesus in that way as the Christ consciousness, this this higher level of universal archetype in a way. You can use Jesus as a teacher. A lot of pagans, a lot of Christo-pagans use Jesus and follow his teachings because he is a wise teacher. He spoke universal truths to matters of spiritual matters, and you can use Jesus in that way as a spiritual guide, mentor, teacher, someone who can give you spiritual enlightenment, and that is totally fine because again you're removing any kind of divine godly associations with him, which could cause a little trouble, possibly, and but then again, if you're a Christian and you believe Jesus is God, but but also you're pagan, or you're a pagan and think that he could be God, and you want to incorporate him as a God, then that would be a little difficult because what would he be used for? Every deity has a purpose. You have, Dionysus is the god of getting drunk and wasted, and among other things. But and then you have Aphrodite, which is the goddess of love, beauty, lust. And then you have all these deities which represent things. So, but what does Jesus as a god? What does he represent for you? What does he do? My suggestion would probably, again, going back to Christian theology, Jesus is salvation. So you could probably incorporate that as, in your pantheon, the person who will give you salvation is Jesus, but also you incorporate other deities along with him. But then also within paganism, normally you have the god and goddess. So if you want to incorporate Jesus into this, who would be the counterpart to Jesus? You have God and goddess, Jesus, and who would fill that role? Some might automatically think the Virgin Mary, but she is not a goddess. She was morphed into the goddess role. In Christianity, she's not divine in any way, but if you look at iconography and the way that she was morphed and put into a role, she feels that divine feminine aspect, and she plays that role. However, I wouldn't really put her into this kind of category, really, because I don't feel she's proper for it. If, historically she, was just, Jesus's mother. But in Gnosticism, you have Sophia, which is wisdom, and it was the lowest emanation of God. And I feel that Sophia would be a good pick into this, because when you go into the more esoteric or the more mythical dimensions of Christianity, when you read the Gospel of John, Jesus is described as the Logos, the Word of God. Logos is translated as Word. I prefer the reason. Reason is a better kind of meaning to Logos. Reason, God's logic and reason, his mind, that kind of thing. But when you read the Old Testament, and I forgot where it was, but it talks about God's wisdom and God's Shekinah, which is the Hebrew, and then when it got translated into Greek, it became Sophia, his wisdom. Actually, I'm sorry, correction. I think Shekinah is just the presence of God. I'm not sure what the what wisdom was in Hebrew. I don't quote me, so I really can't remember this, but I do know there's the reference to wisdom, and then when it became translated to Greek, it became Sophia, and Sophia is the wisdom, and that idea got carried over into Gnosticism, where Sophia was the lowest emanation from God, and Sophia bore the demiurge, the creator of the universe. So you can take Sophia, the feminine aspect of God, this wisdom, and incorporate with Jesus because he is the logos, the reason. So you have these two counterparts. One is male, reason, and one is female with wisdom. And you can then take those two figures, Jesus and Sophia, as your god and goddess. If you, in the pagan setting, which would work, it would cover your god and goddess, kind of your basis. So that's how you would do it. And then, paganism is very open and flexible, so you really could do it any way you want. You're not bound by any doctrines or rules or traditions. You're not following Christian creeds. You're not following doctrines. You're not following anything that is of set tradition within the Christian faith, because in the pagan setting, you are just borrowing Christians borrow, pagans borrow deities from all traditions, regardless of really their context or their place in that religion. This is my observation. I feel, pagans will just take oh, I'm going to worship this deity, and I'm not going to consider the mythological history of that person, and the traditions that the ancients followed in their pagan traditions. It doesn't translate into with the neo-pagans. They just take the deity, work with the deity, do magic, and worship the deity, or honor the deity, that kind of thing, but without the same connection to how it was done in the past, unless you're a Reconstructionist. And there are pagan Reconstructionists, for example, there's Greek pagan Reconstructionists in Greece, which are reconstructing the old pagan religion as close as they can be with the ancient religion in Greece. And it's very different from what neo-pagans would be doing. They're very different. So that is my kind of quick view on, pagan, a Christo-pagan. If you want to be pagan and then incorporate Jesus, it's very easy to do. I think you can incorporate him in that. And the other part, which I mentioned, was if you want to be Christian and incorporate deities into your Christian faith. I think this is something that when people use the term Christo-pagan, they don't automatically assume they automatically go to pagan with Christ. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you're somebody who has this view, they don't go to the other view of being Christian and pagan, of being a Christian pagan. And this takes a lot of workarounds. It's very tricky because you're claiming the title of Christian. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus. But also you work with deities. For example, that's kind of where I kind of stand. I think I was raised Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. And I also I like paganism. I do like paganism. I find it very interesting. I love studying it. I love incorporating deities into my practice. I really don't work with them per se, but for example, over here I have, this is a Lakshmi. I have Lakshmi over here. Then I have, over here, this is Asclepius. And I have an Athena statue. I have Ganesh statue over here. And then, but also on the other side, I have Christian things. This is for a candle. You put a candle in it. It has the Virgin Mary and Jesus on it. And I have various icons on the wall. So I have a blend. I mesh my upbringing with pagan influences. And the way you do this is you really have to break a lot of rules. And I'm going to come from this from a Catholic or Orthodox kind of standpoint, because the Catholics and the Orthodox do share a lot of the similar creeds. that were created, by, by the councils, like the Nicene Creed and Nicaea and other creeds. So they share a lot of the creeds, so they have a lot of the same kind of ideas, but then there are departures, because they did split. There was the Great Schism between East and West, but there's some things that are similar between the two. And I think that if you're going to be a Christian and work with deities, you're going to have to break the creeds, you're going to have to break doctrines, and I think that's fine, because in all honesty, these creeds and doctrines were created by people, by priests and bishops and whatever, and they were created in the 4th century, in the 300s AD, the 4th century, and onwards. So we're looking at 300 years after the death of Christ. These creeds were created by people. In the early Christianity, in early Christian movement, there were a lot of views, a lot of different opinions. Where there was the I forget the technical terms. I like bad brain like that. But they were the people who believed Jesus was only human, people who believed Jesus was solely divine, people who believed he was both, or like whatever. There were so many different views. What Jesus was? The early Christians didn't think Jesus was God. That's a fact. That is, the early Christians did not think Jesus was God. They did not think he was God. That was an idea that later came about later on, especially with later on, like by the end of the 1st century. Especially when you read the Gospel of John, is totally divinized. Jesus is divinized. But the early Christians didn't really see Jesus as a God. He wasn't really God. So there's so many different points of views, and I feel that you really need to break the rules that were set, that whatever rules have been set forth and people have been following ever since, you really need to break them and figure out how you want to be a Christian. I think it's possible, and you're really going to probably find a lot of comfort if you go the Neoplatonist route, because a lot of the Neoplatonism really influenced a lot of the early Christian thought. And sadly, a lot of the early Christian writers and thinkers who were influenced by Neoplatonist ideas were burned as heretics. So a lot of their opinions were thrown away. And if you can do your research, I wish I had some more stuff to present to you. Actually, let me find something as an example, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have my Kindle with me, my trusty Kindle, and I have on here all my lecture notes I have audio lectures, and I have the PDF notes on my Kindle to read. And this one lecture series that I have is Philosophy and Religion, and it talks about in one of the chapters Platonist philosophy and scriptural religion. And there's some things in here I want to relate to this topic of being a Christian and a pagan, or even vice versa. And it was talking about how the idea of the one first principle, and it says here, in the ancient world, no one believed in monotheism. Theos means God, which in ancient usage is synonymous with immortal. Everyone in the ancient world, including Jews and Christians, believed that there were many immortal beings. Hence, Jews and Christians, too, were polytheists in this sense, though they tended to call their immortal beings angels rather than gods. What else we have here? The key point in common between Platonism and scriptural religions is monarchia, which is archi, which means beginning, archi, which is Greek for beginning, first principle or prince. Hence, in ancient philosophical usage, monarchia meant belief in only one first principle or beginning or source of all that there is. The Jewish God was particularly interesting to Greek philosophers because he was invisible, the creator of the visible world, absolutely sovereign, and not begotten by any previous deity, and thus resembled the Platonist first principle more than the pagan deities. And then the key difference between ancient pagan Platonism and the scriptural religions is monolatry, worship of only one god. Latreia is a Greek word for worship. Paganism was based on the civic obligations to participate in the public worship of gods who were regarded as protectors of the community. So we have these concepts of monotheism as being, there is no monotheism. There are many immortal beings, and then you have the distinction with the first principle, the thing that created everything, and then only worshiping one thing, only worshiping one thing. So that's the Platonist blend with the Judeo-Christian tradition. So how can we work with this? You would need to then kind of view things, in my mind, this is how I view things. There would be the God, the source of all things, the monoarchia, the first principle. And then he would also probably be the one God you would worship, which is the monolatry, only worshiping one God. But this says that in the ancient world, there were many immortal beings. So we just, in Christian tradition, you don't call them gods, you call them angels. But in pagans, you call them gods. So you have all these different gods, lower G, and you have one God, big G. And my kind of view is this. You can work with other deities, you can work with other gods. These are immortal beings that are always there. They are like when you say like the angels, and there's these creatures, these beings that are above us, that are slightly divine in nature. They are more divine than us. They're higher spiritually, and you can call them angels or gods with lower G. But they're there. Now, when you go to the Old Testament and the Ten Commandments, it says, "You shall not have no gods other before me." Well, that also that implies that there are other gods. It just says you can't have them before me. So, if you're going to be Christian and you're going to also work with deities, you would probably need to keep some things like one God, one capital G, that deserves worship, and then. Where the other gods come in, lower G, these would be immortal beings that you work with who are here to help serve you, guide you, to work with you, that type of thing. And I think that would work, because when you go into in the Christian, in the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, you have the veneration of saints. And if you can borrow that idea of veneration and apply it to the gods, instead of worshiping them, you're venerating them. So in that sense of veneration is different from worship. How is it different? It's worship. You're worshiping, and then veneration is paying like respect and honor to them. For example, you venerate the saints because they were very holy. You give them honor because they become. They become so close to being like God that they deserve respect and veneration and praise, that kind of thing. You could take the idea of veneration and apply it to the pagan deities. So you believe in one God, but you also believe that these immortal beings deserve veneration. So instead of worshiping, you would have to venerate. So you really, and I know paganism, there's a lot of like worship. But you would, if you want to be Christian and then involve the pagan deities, you would have to really draw the line of what you consider worship and what is veneration, and you have to kind of figure that out in a way. So, for example, like with me, I don't worship these statues I have on my shelf. I don't worship them. I look at them. I kind of connect to what they represent, and hopefully draw that down to me. What they represent. So like when I'm sick, I'll look at the Asclepius statue and ask for healing, that kind of thing. But I don't worship them. I don't offer them food and drink. I might bring, like if I'm asking Ganesh to help me with something, I'll give him chocolate. I will give him something shiny, because those are things that he gets his attention. I brought a rose in today, and I put it next to Lakshmi. It's just a way. It's a way of kind of honoring, but not worshiping. I don't believe that these deities are supreme. And that's another thing, if you're going to be a Christian and involve the pagan deities, is that you have to remember that you need to put into context that these deities that you are working with are not supreme. They are not the head honcho. They are not the be-all, end-all. They don't control everything. They are not perfect. If you look at, you know, the ancient religions, the gods were just as petty and cruel and mean as us. They had their problems. They were just immortal. They just didn't die. So they get to, you know, have family drama for the rest of eternity. But it's just that. They're there. They're these forces of the universe that you can work with. But they're not supreme and all-ruling and all-powerful. So that would be the Christian, the one other side if you want to be Christian and involve the pagan deities. So, and to end this video, because it's getting really long, I hope I really did express myself in this. So to sum up again, if you want to be pagan and involve Christ, you can. Just figure out how you want to do it. Do you want him to be your you want him to fill your role as your god and have Sophia as your goddess, or pick a different goddess, something? Do you want him to just be your spiritual teacher and guide you in your spiritual path while you're a pagan, working with whatever deity you want, but still incorporate him into your life in some aspect? Go ahead, you can do it. There's nothing that says you can't. Or do you want to be Christian, still call yourself Christian, and work with other deities? Then you have to really change your system, your structure of your theological structure of really going away from traditional doctrine and creeds and really blending more of a Neoplatonist philosophical viewpoint, and kind of creating your own structure of how you view things, and, you know, how you define what God is and what role the gods are for, and what are they made of? Like, you know, are they attributions of God? If you want to go like a Hindu route. The Hindus, you know, one school of thought of the Hindus is that Brahma, all gods and goddesses are some aspect of Brahma. Brahma is the ultimate being, the supreme being, and then all the other gods and goddesses are just a representation, manifestation of him. And that's the kind of view too I kind of view. You know, like Lakshmi is prosperity. She represents the prosperity of God, and, you know, and it's just they're interconnected. But again, that kind of idea doesn't mesh with traditional Christianity, but you're going to have to break some rules, like I said. So break rules and make your own rules, because nowadays we have the knowledge available to us that the theologians did hundreds of years ago. We have all the knowledge that they have available to us. We can make our own decisions theologically. But to end this video, I want to recommend a book. It is Jesus Through Pagan Eyes by Reverend Mark Townsend, and it includes it says bridging bridging neo-pagan perspectives with a progressive view of Christ. So this really talks about Christ through the pagan tradition. There's a lot of essays in here from various people, how they kind of view Jesus, his role, how to blend him into pagan traditions, and just basically the story of this reverend and how he is just pagan friendly and very involved with the pagan community, and views, you know, meshes it, and it's very, very interesting. So I recommend this book, Jesus Through Pagan Eyes. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I kind of made myself clear. There's a lot more I feel like I want to say, but I'm limited. I really don't want to make like an hour-long video. So I hope you enjoyed. Okay, take care.